Welcome to the Inner Fire Climbing Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Firestone. Today is the June 2026 Ask Me Anything episode, the extremely late, like not fashionably late, just late edition. I've been in Squamish for the last month, and the end of the trip was rather hectic. Conditions were quite good the entire time that we were there, really. Unseasonably good. Unseasonably good. And there was a lot of climbing happening and a lot of things happening and not a lot of quiet space to record a podcast. We were staying in a sweet friend of a friend's place and kids outside, dogs running around upstairs, all kinds of things. So didn't feel like that was up to snuff for the show. Not that the standards of the show are particularly high. And then got home and boy, the baby has been having a hard time sleeping. So it hasn't really been very easy to record here either. But she's asleep for now. Even though she's pretty far away in the house, I can tell I'm being quiet. And if you have a baby, you'll understand. Or if you ever had one. Anyways, it was a good trip. Quite possibly one of the best climbing trips of my life. Very different being on a climbing trip with a family, but it was cool and probably unbalanced in favor of my own climbing. So got to make sure my wife gets some of the climbing in the future. I think we have plans to do that. And it was just cool being in one of my favorite places with my daughter and seeing her learn about the world and touch rocks and, grab handfuls of dirt and try to put them in her mouth and all kinds of other baby things. So it was good. And I won't belabor any of my climbing from the trip too much. I'm sure that stuff will come up here and there eventually. But for now, let's just say that these episodes are supported by my Patreon and by my clients. So if you enjoy the show or if you want to ask questions in these AMA episodes, you can support me at patreon.com/innerfireclimbing. And you can consider giving me a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I hear that does something. I don't know what, but go give me a 5-star review or a 10-star review or whatever. I think maybe you have to actually write a review on Apple Podcasts. So go on there, give me a 5-star review, talk about how bad the sound quality is, but how insightful and incisive I am or whatever. All right, let's get into the questions. Enough of that. Okay, Cian asks, what makes for a good guidebook? If there's more than one, do you choose between them or get multiple? Or have you moved to digital alternatives? In the last few years, I've been doing more bouldering, so I think my guidebook preferences are going to be very bouldering biased. But the overhead topo is probably the most important and hardest job with the bouldering guidebook. It's definitely the easiest thing to mess up. It's just so important for being able to get around an area. And having just been in Squamish, like the Squamish guidebook is great. It's one of my favorites for sure. But even in the era before the digital guidebooks, it was so easy to find your way around. I mean, Squamish, for anyone who hasn't been there, it's very, very dense. Like the Grand Wall and North Walls areas are basically just giant talus fields with lots of vegetation. So quite hard to get around, and you'll think you're on a trail to something that seems like it's a direct path. You could even maybe see people climbing there and talking and stuff, and it'll actually be like quite hard to navigate with pads. And you wind up needing to, backtrack, and eventually you learn all the ways around. But a good guidebook really simplifies a lot of that. It should give you all the information that you need to enjoy the area. And one of the things that will take a bouldering day from fun to frustrating very quickly is not being able to find your way around. So feeling confused about how to get around is definitely a bad thing. And that is arguably one job of the guidebook, to alleviate some of that confusion. I do think in just a more general sense that like different people probably have different demands of their guidebooks just because they might want something different out of the sport. So for example, it's nice to do the problems, quote, right. But historically, I've also really enjoyed figuring things out for myself. So a guidebook that just shows me pictures of the climbs and says what they are and says what they're graded, like that might be fine for me. But also a lot of guidebooks like to specify start holds and, maybe even get into the details of beta, like I'll give you an example of one that I'm not hugely fond of, the Green and Black Joe's Valley book, which would actually like tell you move by move, like pull on here, go left hand to this hold, move your feet to here, go right hand to this hold. I think that's a little bit ridiculous. Like it just assuming that people are going to climb things exactly the same way is kind of silly. And maybe that stems from some like old school hard man, like, you have to do what I did for it to qualify kind of thing. I'm not sure. Or maybe it's just a different interpretation of the sport than mine. But yeah, I like a guidebook that leaves a little bit of room for interpretation for sure. I actually got bit in Squamish by climbing a problem and starting the way that the guidebook explained to start, and then going online and realizing everyone else started it differently than me or interpreted that differently than me. And that's an example where the digital alternatives are kind of changing the sport a little bit. Like the way that something most frequently gets climbed on Kaya definitely influences that problem or the general community perception of what that problem is, whether or not that's the correct interpretation. And that leads to a form of entropy that can be a little bit disappointing. So I do think it's kind of a can of worms, the digital thing, but you can't deny like having all that information on your phone and not having to carry a guidebook around. The Squamish guidebook is like huge. So yeah, the digital ones are definitely nice, but I do feel like I need both. So I will often, consult the paper one when I'm at home and making plans or talking to people, or even take a picture of it. And then I'll use the digital one just to get around zones, especially if I haven't been to them. Yeah. Nice to haves would be like pins and by QR code in the book is pretty nice for sure. Like full color pictures, nice pictures. Those are definitely really nice things to have. Maybe not totally essential. Like I've definitely had bouldering guidebooks that were just topos or hand-drawn topos, and those can work. There's actually kind of like a exploratory sort of feeling to like trying to match up the drawing to the real boulder, as long as the drawings are, within reason, similar to the boulders. And yeah, some of my favorites, which you didn't ask, but I'll say it anyway. I love the Squamish books. I always loved the digital updates that Mark Bourdon does for those. So you can go on the website and see all the things that he's adding to the next edition in like a PDF before they get, when you have like edition 3 was out and the 4th one wasn't out yet, you could go get a PDF of all the stuff that was going to be in the 4th one that wasn't in the 3rd one, which is really nice. But they're also just beautiful, really well laid out. It's so much. It's just so huge, kind of a mammoth project. And then I haven't actually been to Yosemite since this guidebook came out, but the Yosemite Bouldering Guidebook by Kimbrough, Moore, and Shannon Joslin is just a beautiful, exceptional guidebook. And I can't wait to go bouldering in the valley. It's been over 15 years since I've climbed Yosemite. It's crazy. I feel like that's some form of heresy. And then for routes, I always love the Smith book. I mean, that's the place that I've sport climbed the most, for sure. And I always felt like it covered everything. I mean, I always understood what I was doing, more or less, and had the information I needed. Lots of cool stories in there, lots of information, very, very dense. Yeah, kind of classic. Those are guidebooks that I can like see in my head for sure. There's a lot more, but those are the ones that spring to top of mind. Oh, I guess I didn't answer. If there's more than one, do you choose between them or get multiple? I've never really been in a situation where it's like relevant to buy them all and they're all options. Usually it's like one is out of print and it's really, really expensive. So I'm not sure I've really had that problem. But like, for example, here where I live, there's the Leavenworth Bouldering Guidebook, and now there's the digital guidebook on Kaya, but then there's also the Central Washington Guidebook, which is very, very old. But now there's also a newer Washington Bouldering Guidebook that includes all the areas that are in that. So it's like, because I have history in this area, I have all the options, but nowadays you would just buy whatever the newest one for the area is that you are going. So I don't know. I do like collecting them though. They're definitely fun to have. Thanks for the question. All right. Daniel asks, I've heard multiple people talk about the benefits of setting your own problems. My setting options are primarily on boards. Is there a general framework that would help make this more beneficial, or is it the act of exploring that provides the benefit? I know it's a broad question, but would be curious to hear about your setting process. All right, good question. So the way I think about this is like normal climbing is creative, but it's also largely an act of consuming. Like you just need to show up and the thing kind of happens to you, like watching a TV show or reading a book or something like that. If you read a book, like you can picture what's happening in your head. It can be creative in that sense. And your interpretation of the words can be creative. Like each person is going to feel something different when they read a sentence. It is kind of the same with climbing in the sense that you're coming up with beta and, the problem is doing something to you. Setting, on the other hand, it really is purely creative. Like you're coming up with that feeling that you want, and then you're trying to make the climb that's going to offer that feeling. So it's almost like a different, it's just totally separate. It's a separate interpretation of the skill. It's almost like If you have a language that you could only read and you learned how to speak it, or vice versa, you could only speak it and you learned how to read it. That's really how I think of climbing and setting. It's like until you do both of those things, you don't really know the language, even if you can climb to a really high degree. Like if you've never done any setting, then there's just something that you don't understand about climbing. There's some lack. And I think that's what you're trying to get. And so if you think about it with like the language metaphor, if you were learning how to speak a language and you didn't speak any of that language at all, you would start in a very, very rudimentary fashion, So if you think about like the way, I'm just throwing a million metaphors at you here, Daniel, so sorry if none of this is landing, but think about the way that like a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old would play with like blocks, they're going to like stack them. And they're just learning at that point, like physics and like the rules of the environment. There's no real imagination, but when you get up to like a 10-year-old or a 14-year-old or something playing with something like Legos or an erector set or whatever, like they can really like create things and be very imaginative and thoughtful with it by building on that same fundamental skill of like putting blocks together. So there's almost like a childlikeness to it at the very beginning where it's like you don't want to be too restrictive or too preordained about it. You want to just be very childlike and open and just try to have fun with it and just literally try to stack blocks at the beginning. I do think setting on a board is much, much different than setting like proper setting where you're putting the holds on the wall, just because setting on a board, you're kind of starting with the options preset. So it's like working with a very small stack of Legos. And like, to me, this is something I say on the podcast all the time, but the climbing skill that you use is fundamentally dictated by the terrain that you're climbing on, the shape of the wall that you're climbing on first, and then the type of holds second. And the shape of the wall that you're climbing on a board is always a flat wall. So in one sense, that's really nice because you can just focus on the shape of the holds and the directionality of the holds. But in another sense, there's this huge world of how terrain impacts your skill that you're not getting that exposure to if you're only setting on a board. So if this is interesting to you, if you think that it might be like good for your climbing skill to practice setting, I would definitely recommend trying to set in some way where you actually get to engage with more terrain, because the lessons will be just much more mind-blowing and much more applicable to whatever your like performance mode of climbing is, whether that's indoor, outdoor, whatever. And if all you care about is board climbing, then you're set. That's all you need. Sounds like you did a setting clinic, so I hope that went well for you. It was almost 2 weeks ago at this point. So once again, sorry for the delay, but thanks for the question. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope that it's fun for you. I hope it's as fun for you as it is for me. It's probably one of the few things in my life that I'm like, I feel like that ship sailed. Like, I don't think I'm going to do any more setting really, other than maybe for fun. And it kind of makes me sad. It's like so fun. So I hope it's that fun for you. Okay, Jantina asks, my question for June is pretty open-ended. What are your thoughts about Janja's ascent of bibliography? Well, I'm not surprised, although I don't know if anybody really is. I guess the only thing I really found surprising is that it wasn't the other one that she was trying, La Dura Dura. She was trying La Dura Dura. So I think I was sort of expecting Janja to do that one and not really expecting her to do bibliography. But maybe I just was out of the loop. I'm at this point becoming almost hermit-like with my lack of interest in climbing YouTube and Instagram. So I often am the last person to get news of this variety. And if it was public that she was trying this route, I didn't know about it. I suspect that this is not even the tip of the iceberg for Janja's outdoor performance era. And who knows how much she's going to split her time between competition and climbing outside. She did start a YouTube channel, I know, which that kind of indicates something to me. I think it's just a lot harder to create content about the World Series circuit than it is to create content about climbing outside. So maybe that represents some kind of shift, or maybe they're just thinking about how to monetize her career more effectively than they have until here. But man, the main thing that I want to talk about when you ask me about Janja doing bibliography is the video. First of all, how sick is it that we get a like elite level world class announcement of Ascend, and we get the uncut footage 24 hours later. And it's just a follow cam on Instagram, like of the uncut ascent. Personally, as a climbing nerd and a climbing coach, that is what I want. Like, I know all the film tours and everything are like really cool and hype and they get everybody super psyched, but I really just want to watch people climb. I love all the stories and everything, but like the main thing that I want is to watch people climb. Probably have said this before, but in my top 5 all-time climbing videos would definitely be Ben Moon's ascent of Rain Shadow, because it's just a uncut tracking shot of him doing the whole route, from like starting at the bottom until clipping the chains, and over the ascent is him just talking about the experience of trying the route. Just very unfiltered thoughts from him of climbing the route. And it's so, it tells the whole story. It has all the emotion. It has all the rawness and the feel of it. And you don't miss a single move on the route. And to me, that's like what I want. And I know that that's not, for a broad audience. That's my very particular, type of climbing brain that wants that. But that is what I want. And I've gone back and watched the Janja footage a few times because I can just go look at it on Instagram. That's just spectacular. I mean, the way she moves is so incredible. She's so efficient. And if you weren't paying really close attention to her hands and her forearms, the like angle of her elbows, you really wouldn't know where the crux is. Or I suppose if you knew the route, then you would know where the crux is, although she did it like a little bit different than other ascents, I think. I want to say she added a couple little intermediates that I don't remember seeing other ascensionists use. But yeah, if you watch the angle of her, pip joints, and you watch when her elbows come up, you'll kind of know when she's trying hard, but the rest of it, she's just radically efficient. And I mean, if I didn't know anything about her and I didn't know anything about the route, and you told me that this was just a very good climber climbing a 13D, like, I think I would believe you. But it's not. It's one of the best in the world, climbing one of the hardest routes in the world. And that's just incredible. It's testament to how cool the sport is that people can dial things like that. And it's testament to just what an incredible athlete she is. I really think that she's the GOAT, I don't know. I think it seems unlikely to me that we'll get a generational talent in the indoor space like as dominant as Janja in the next 10 years. Like, I'd be surprised if anybody else had a run of form as good as hers. I think she was in the right place at the right time in terms of her ability level peaking. Right when we came into the Olympics, the sport started getting a lot bigger. The style started changing a lot more. And now the field dramatically shifts based on the style of setting comp to comp. And this really feels like a make or break year, but now I'm straying away from the original topic. Anyways, right place, right time, incredible athlete, so cool to watch. And I just doubt that we'll see anybody quite like that in the indoor competition world anytime soon. So I'm really excited to see what else she can do. It's a landmark ascent. It's a really impressive ascent. And also, in a way, it's just like the very first step for her on this journey. So super excited to see where she takes it next. She's just cool as hell. Thanks for the question. Okay, different Daniel asks, what are the 3 to 5 best bang for your buck mobility / flexibility exercises? Okay, I choose to interpret this as end range loaded strength exercises because you use the word exercises and didn't say anything about stretching. And I'm just going to throw a few out because the 3 to 5 best, I mean, I'm sorry for being a broken record, people, but you can't say something is the best unless you have the details of the person that you're applying it to and what their goals are, yada, yada. So here are 3 to 5 that I like and that I program very frequently. 90-90, also known as shin box, and very similar variations, especially 90-90 to lunge. You get your internal rotation, you get your external rotation. The skill of extending the hip while the forward hip is in external rotation is very, very crucial skill in rock climbing. And when people can't do it and can't balance at the hip joint, is really demonstrative, in my opinion, of something that they're going to not be able to do on the climbing wall. And so that to me is just a good fundamental. Like if I'm getting to know an athlete, I love to just see them do that exercise and get a sense of how good they are at it. It's like if they're bad at it, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be a good climber. They might be able to compensate. They might be very kind of front wheel drive, or they might be like very locked into neutral hip position. Maybe they're, running or track and field history or something like that. But if they're super, super good at it, I'm going to know something about the way that they use their lower body while they climb. And it's consistently a pretty good predictor of being able to get weight on your feet and having like good rooting technique. So that's probably my all-time favorite. Next one would be the Copenhagen raise or adductor machine. I just think that strength through the adductor and being really strong when the hip is in abduction is essential for modern climbing, and especially here in the Northwest for like compression climbing, granite climbing. So that might be more of a strength exercise than like a mobility or flexibility exercise. But if you neglect that range of motion, for sure you're missing something in your training. So I would say that qualifies as bang for your buck. Horse stance, if done right, is definitely essential. Has to be done right. You have to understand that it is an exercise about pressing into external rotation and actually controlling the pelvis. So trying to get that hip extension and external rotation and remaining stable. Yeah, you have to understand the actual intent of the exercise, which is to drive the knees out and back and to drive the pelvis forward while remaining upper leg roughly parallel to the ground and pelvis neutral. And if you can do those things, you don't actually really need weight necessarily, because the weight is more resisting the hip flexion extension pattern than actually driving the hip external internal rotation pattern. But the weight can be a really helpful cue. So there's a lot to learn with that exercise, but if it's done right, if you have good instruction, then I think it could be qualified as pretty essential, pretty valuable. Pancake, I may have come around to a little bit, but I think that it's really hard to do right. And I think a lot of people mess it up. And it becomes much more of a spinal exercise. It's just so easy to compensate, and it's so easy to not actually attack the pelvis with the pancake, or to not get into the hamstrings. I think it just needs in-person instruction, and maybe it's just a person-to-person thing. But if we're assuming that this theoretical person, that we're prescribing these things for, takes the time to get educated about the exercise and understands how to do them, I would say pancake is a, top 10 sort of tier climbing mobility, flexibility exercise. And then I'll throw in a random one just because I've been programming it a lot lately and doing it a lot lately. I think the half kneeling windmill is like a pretty banger exercise. It's kind of a better version of an arm bar. You get some shoulder flexibility, you get some thoracic rotation and lateral flexion, you get some hips, and it's, interesting in all those ranges. It can be quite challenging if the load is high. But it's not like heavy enough or intense enough to not be superset with just about anything else. So it makes like a really good, like I'm not sure what to superset with this compound thing. And this athlete is lacking in one of those areas. Like you just throw that in there. It's just a really nice, like gap filler programming thing. So I would say that qualifies as bang for buck. Also, it's just really fun, honestly. The one downside of it is I think it's quite complicated to do well. So people need to be like quite proprioceptive or have maybe some basic experience with kettlebell exercises. And it's also very hard to fail. Like you wouldn't really want to be in the bottom of one of those and lose your balance. So it's not something that you're going to go like crazy heavy on. But I think people intuitively understand that. And even just doing that movement unloaded could be quite valuable for a lot of people. So it doesn't necessarily need to be loaded crazy heavy. There's lots and lots and lots of other exercises that are in my list of things that I prescribe for people that I would say for the right person would be much better than the 5 that I just listed. But those are 5 that I would say like have broad appeal or like broad value. Like most climbers could benefit from at least 3 of those, I would say. So those are probably in the bang for your buck category. Good question. Okay. We have a Careless Talk Climbing Podcast interlude on the Inner Fire Climbing Podcast here, because Anthony's question is, imagine there's a boulder 5 minutes from your house which has a V4 on one side and a V11 on the other. After you swiftly tick the 11, ooh, thanks Anthony, you do some spelunking and realize there is a small piece of wood holding the boulder up. You do some calculations to realize breaking the piece of wood would result in the V11 tilting 5 degrees, creating a beautiful V13 project right next to your house. You've driven past this boulder every other day and haven't seen anybody working on the V4 or the V11 in a while. As a business owner and a dad with limited time, do you break the wood? If you wouldn't, would your answer change if instead of creating a V13, you create Washington's first V15? If you would, what's the difference between this and chipping holds? Okay, I'll confess that I had a gut response to this, and then I had to sit there and really like think it through. I had to actually take this little hypothetical world you've created and just be like, if this actually happened, what would I actually do? And I think that, I survived my own moral test. Cause I don't think I would, I don't think I would break the wood. I mean, for starters, the way that you're busy when you're a dad and a business owner is like, if I can't get out to climb on my project, I sort of feel like it doesn't matter that much if it's right next to my house or if it's like in Leavenworth, 25 minutes away. I know that sounds crazy, but it's like I either have an afternoon to myself or I'm lucky if I get time to climb on the board. And there's not a lot of middle ground. And the thing about the board versus a boulder that's like close to my house is I can climb on the board with the baby monitor and I can't take the baby monitor to a boulder that's near my house. But thinking about this and talking about it with my wife, we both agreed that it probably matters more what happens to the V4 than what happens to the V11, because way, way more people climb V4. So I guess the question is like, am I taking away a sick V4 that could get climbed all the time and replacing it with like a V7 or something? Or I could be even, I guess it's on the other side from the 11. So if I'm tilting it 5 degrees, I'm probably replacing a V4 with like a V1 or something, right? Which I think would be kind of, there's some moral calculus there of like, am I giving myself something, but also taking something away from other people, or even giving something to other people? Like, I'm not really sure how the math works out because I don't know how many people, choose to climb at each grade or are capable of climbing at whatever grade. But I'll tell you an interesting sort of similar real world quandary that I ran into in Squamish, which I think is kind of similar to this case. I was climbing at the Ashlew, which is like a new area in Squamish, and there's this problem called Bronze Fury, which is a V10. And recently, Hamish MacArthur did a low start to Bronze Fury, which he gave V15. You got to understand the boulder is in kind of a slot, so it's maybe 30 degrees overhanging or something, and the boulder is huge and it goes way down into this pit. So when you climb Bronze Fury, you just have this very faint sloped landing that you put your pads on, and your spotter like grabs you before you fall down in the pit. I didn't actually try that boulder myself personally, but I like watched this happen, and it's like a little bit sketchy with the pit there. And Tildy like climbs out of that pit, the V15 that Hamish put up. So we were kind of joking, like, you could totally fill in the landing for Bronze Fury and it would make Bronze Fury a lot more fun to climb. It wouldn't be sketchy. You could make the landing high enough to pull on, because right now, like, short people can't pull on. They need a pad stack. And way, way more people are going to climb Bronze Fury than are ever going to climb Tildy, right? But the climbing community puts a lot of value on hard climbing, even though most of us can't do it. And so it's important to us that Tildy remain accessible, even though the vast majority of days at Ashlew, no one's going to climb on it. No one's going to touch those holds. So my solution was maybe we could like build a landing that had a trapdoor in it, so like have some struts, and you could like lay beams across the struts And then if you want to climb Bronze Fury, you just put your pads on the struts that you've laid across. And then if you want to climb Tilde, you just have to like take some of that landing and take it out. But the cross braces would like remain in place, if that makes sense. Doesn't seem like this is an option on the boulder near my house. But I think the most significant part of this question would be announcing to the scientific community that I had found a new type of wood that could hold up a multi-ton boulder successfully. So I don't know what the deal is with that wood, but maybe the scientists would come in and want to take that wood off to their labs, and then I'd wind up with a V13 without having to break my own moral code. Who knows? But yeah, there's lots of cool, hard things to do. I don't need one closer to my house. I'm psyched to have what I have. I'm very grateful to have what I have. So good question though. Fun to think about. All right. Jishnu asks, how should weekend warriors think about seasonal periodization, especially during outdoor performance season? A lot of advice assumes a large increase in climbing volume. Does that change when you get outside 2 to 4 days a month? Stated differently, how should weekend warriors think about in-season training? Okay. A lot of advice assumes a large increase in climbing volume. Yeah. I think it depends on what kind of climbing you're doing, but for sure going from, a few days a week of a few hours in the gym to full days outside where you're climbing from like sun up to sundown, that definitely could be a significant change. I think the large increase in climbing volume probably has more to do with when people go on trips. 2 to 4 days a month is not going to blow up your monthly climbing volume, really, I don't think. But going on a trip where you climb like 5 days out of 7, and those are all big days, that is a dramatic spike in volume in a really short period. So I think it has less to do with outdoor season and more to do with trips, probably that type of advice. But climbing season could still be a big increase in volume. I think the real thing that you get with climbing season is like the drive is higher. People try harder, because it's like a more, precious resource compared to climbing the gym. That's not true of everybody, but it is true of a lot of people. I think that these days, like the big volume culprit is probably more boards than climbing outside, but that might be my coach bias. And the other thing related to the volume thing is like when you're in your quote off season, you might be fine being like 85% recovered. So just from like a perception point of view, you might go to the gym and just be like, yeah, I feel like okay today, so I'm going to like try hard. Versus in your in season, feeling 85% recovered might actually be bad. You might be like, oh, I'm not ready to go to the project. And so just like what you're willing to tolerate in terms of your readiness might be a lot different in your in season, in which case you would want to bring your volume down for your in season, even if your volume wasn't high, just from that perspective of like wanting to feel even fresher and wanting to like, be ready to give it your all on the proj. Just generally with periodization, I think nonlinear is probably a better bet for most climbers. So kind of trying to work on different aspects of your climbing kind of all the time and just rolling from thing to thing to thing. So maybe having like an A, B, C day where you work on different aspects. I don't like to say different energy systems, but a more powerful day, a more red pointy day, a more capacity oriented day. That would be a good mix for bouldering, or maybe like an execution day and an endurance day and a capacity day for sport climbing, for instance. Those kind of things I think are good general strategies that work quite well. And then when you go into your in-season, you just, based on the type of climbing you're doing when you go outside, you just replace that day in your week with going outside. So if you're going to go outside and sport climb, that's your capacity day. If you're going to go outside and boulder, that's kind of your project day or your execution day, depending on how hard the boulders are. And then you don't have to like change too much, really. You just sort of keep rolling with that. And that's kind of what I generally do, like just sort of a natural method of trying to work on the things that I feel like I need and not, trying to periodize perfectly or stack up all these adaptations, because it just gets, frankly, so complicated so fast. And in a world where one is considering committing some sort of illegal act to tip a boulder 5 degrees in favor of my projecting logistics, if I'm willing to break that moral rule, then I might as well make things really simple for my training, make things really easy on myself. Convenience does matter, but I think I choose to take on that convenience in my training rather than breaking the law, if that makes sense. So how should weekend warriors think about in-season training? I would just take whatever the adaptations you expect to get from your climbing in season, and you don't need to train those things. You're free of training those things. Everything else, keep training. Probably the easiest way to think about it. And when in doubt, go bouldering. Thanks for the question. Okay, Cameron asks, do you need to train off the wall to progress as a climber? Could off the wall training be the key injury deterrent for me as I keep progressing? Started climbing February 2026, and I'm seeing progress and gains every time I go to the gym. I'm climbing about 3 to 4 times a week / 15, 20 hours a week. Just curious as to how to stay away from burnout and injury so I can climb as much as possible. Awesome, man. I'm honored that you started climbing in February and you're listening to my podcast and asking me questions. So thanks. Sick that you're seeing progress and that you're so psyched on climbing. 15 to 20 hours a week is a ton for only being like 4 or 5 months into the sport. So that's pretty badass. The thing with training, and I rail on this all the time on the show, is the goal of physical training, especially off the wall training, is to increase your capacity. So you're just trying to make the actual tissues stronger. You're trying to make your body tolerate more strain. So it's a very cyclical, or it's a very indirect sort of cycle where you train, you make your body a little stronger, then you can tolerate more climbing, and you practice, you get better at climbing. So you kind of understand some of this cycle, right? In that sense, though, you got to understand that the training off the wall to progress as a climber sort of assumes that it's a very direct relationship, and it's not. It's quite indirect. So training can increase your capacity. Right now for you, climbing is probably quite a lot of strain, and any training that you would do is going to need to replace climbing stimulus, not be added to it. So if you keep climbing 15 to 20 hours a week, but you add a couple hours a week, 1 or 2 full body training sessions, then that's probably actually going to hold back your climbing progress right now, just because it's going to make you a little bit more tired. Your climbing will be like slightly lower speed, slightly lower coordination because you're a little more fatigued. In the long run, that might turn out to be worthwhile. I can't really know without running that experiment. I would probably just take some of that 15 to 20 hours and replace it with a little bit of off the wall training, just because climbing is very fast. Climbing is very powerful, and there are adaptations in the body that are really hard to get from super fast, super powerful movement. I would need to know some other things about you in order to say whether one of those things would be like the right thing for you to do. I don't really know, because I don't know how old you are. I don't know what your history is with strength and conditioning. And those things really matter for answering this question. But my bigger point would be the key, quote unquote, is paying attention to your session volume and your average velocity. And if you pay attention to those things, that's the best that you're going to do with having any kind of deterrent to injury. Training off the wall, doing different types of training, those things are often lauded as being like contributing to injury prevention or injury deterrence, but there's really just very little research to suggest that any sort of thing like that actually exists. Like, we can't really prevent injuries. We don't actually know how to do that. What you can do to get injured less is to climb less, and then you take on less risk and you're less likely to get injured. But you don't want to do that, because you want to maximize the amount of time that you can climb, because you want to practice as much as you can so you can keep getting better. And also, climbing is really fun. So what I would focus on instead is understand that you are eventually going to get injured, and work on your philosophy and your psychology regarding that, and be ready for it, and know that it's going to suck, but that you can deal with it and get through it. And then pay attention to those key variables: session volume, average velocity, novelty of the movements, the nuances of your current recovery, and like what's going on in your life and stuff like that. That stuff is much more valuable to pay attention to than worrying about your training modes, because your training modes are going to come and go. And like I said, I don't know you, so I can't make exact recommendations, but the best one that I can make is to pay attention to those other things, because that's the best tool in your arsenal for sure. Okay, Sam asks, in a world where most climbers are rewarded and praised for following a similar path, i.e. limit climbing / grade chasing, How does the sport grow when the majority all live and act in the same way? I feel like there's a begging the question going on here, but I also think you kind of have the causality backwards. I mean, I think you're kind of making it sound like climbing used to be this virtuous thing, and then at some point in recent times, grade chasing was introduced, and now grade chasing is like taken over the soul of climbing, and we're all very sad about it. But I don't actually think that's true. I think that's a mirage. I think the reality is social media and the modern era and the popularity of bouldering have made limit climbing and grade chasing a lot sexier. And so more people engage with those things like, earlier in the sport, or maybe they talk a lot more about engaging with those things. But the truth is, like, limit climbing and grade chasing have always been what has made the sport grow. Like, I remember being very, very new to the sport and seeing, gosh, I don't even remember what the first one was. The next one that I remember was King Lines. And I'll have to go, maybe it was First Ascent, even the very first video. I think it was First Ascent, the very first climbing video that I saw. I remember like looking up the grades of things that were in that and looking up the grades of things that were in King Lines and just being like so blown away. And watching the dosage films, like all of those early pieces of media, like there are stories in there that are unrelated to the limit climbing, but for sure they were building most of the stories around the fact that these things were really, really hard. And so social media has like sped up that cycle, and a lot more people are participating in it in like a more, I don't want to say shallow, just a more monotone or like, yeah, kind of boring way, maybe. But it's always been there. It's not a new thing. Social media just makes it really, really popular and commonplace. So I don't think we're in any danger of like the sport not growing. I think the heart of the question that you're really asking, and where my mind gets pulled, if I'm being cynical when I read your question, is like, what's going to happen to the other part of the sport, the soul of the sport, which I think it used to be, if I was going to wax, philosophical or wax nostalgic, it used to be a little bit easier to have the soul of it because it just wasn't quite as, sexy to grade chase back in the day. But I don't know. I do think that there are people out there who are still doing it for the right reasons and still have the soul of it. Like being in Squamish, I'm so inspired by some of the developers up in Squamish and like the stuff that they're finding, and the way that they're engaging with climbing is just so pure and impressive. Those people are out there, man. And like, they don't all necessarily get their time on social media. Like, for sure, it just plays well on social media for somebody to be like, I did this really hard thing. Here's the video of it set to some popular music that people like. Yeah, that plays super well. But seeing something new and cool or something really aesthetic, like I can't tell you how many times I've gone on social media and just seen some like sick aesthetic boulder and somebody's just climbing it. I've never heard of the person. There's no music. And I just think it's the sickest thing ever. So like, for sure, you can train your algorithm to show you that stuff. And that makes me feel like the sport will still grow in that way. It's just, it's a little bit more of a niche than it used to be. And the truth is, like, I keep framing all of this around social media, I think because I spend so much time on social media. But when I'm actually out there, when I was actually out there in the forest in Squamish, like climbing with people, like people are trying to climb hard. That is a real thing for sure. But people are also out there fucking doing Nadia slob with a different beer in each hand and like drinking the beer while they climb it. And there's all kinds of fun shenanigans going on. And it's definitely not all about climbing the hardest thing you can all the time. So I feel simultaneously nostalgic and cynical and optimistic and hopeful all at the same time about this question. So I don't think I really solved it, but I'm glad you asked it because it is interesting. But yeah, Janja did bibliography and we're halfway through the year. So many crazy things have happened in 2026 in terms of growing the sport. And I think there's still a lot more to come. So can't predict exactly how it's going to happen, but it's going to keep growing for sure because more and more people are doing it, and it's the sickest sport ever, and that's what we all love about it. So that's it. That's all the questions. Thanks, everybody. Sorry for being a week late on this. Being a dad and a business owner. Boy, I got to go find a boulder to knock over so I can have a project. Thank you all for the support. I'll see you again in just a few short weeks. Bye.